Good morning, folks. This is your PeachVirus update for the 25th. I'm not sure whether or not I should be more peachy about this or more virusy about this. I'm thinking maybe virusy. By the way, shithead closed his arguments with claiming that the anyone who didn't that there's something going around that anyone that doesn't vote to remove Trump is going to have his head on a pike. Exactly how many times does a prosecutor get to insult the jury and get away with it? This is twice now at least that we know of. So yeah. So yeah, that's a load of crap. Look, I want to spend the rest of this on this developing stuff that's coming out of China. There is a story that is currently up on the web, published on the 14th. This is interesting, of last year. All right, now it's starting to make the rounds on Twitter, but again, this is a little over a year old, July 14th of 2019. And the interesting aspect of this is that this was two people in Manitoba, actually in Winnipeg in the town, taken out of a virology lab because they sent material to China. What did she do? What material did she send? Good question. Apparently, the RCMP says there was no threat to public safety at this time. There may have been no public safety threat because it was sent out of the country. However, there's some questions here as to exactly what was sent and exactly what happened. Note that the only level 4 lab that China has is in the place where this thing started. Now, the Chinese are claiming that this virus originated in transmission between animals and humans, and probably because of essentially what amounts to bushmeat, which is fairly popular in China, and that's how the original infection occurred. The problem with that premise is that normally when you have that kind of an infectious path, it's not human transmissible. So if you have a flu that a pig has, for example, you can get it because the pig can transmit it to you, but you cannot transmit it to other people because the way the virus works, it requires the pig as part of its life cycle in order to be able to be transmissible to another organism. So it can infect you and get you sick, but what you shed is not usable by another host. And this one's different in that we have direct human-to-human transmission, and in addition to that, we appear to have some mutation already going on. In viral terms, it's called viral reassortment. It's not the same thing as mutation among fully living organisms. And remember that viruses are only part of the genetic code necessary for independent life. So without a host, a virus does nothing. It is the host that causes all of the problems. So as if you want to look at it that way, I suppose, causing the problems. Anyway, so we've got that, but again, this is just resurfaced. The idea that this was intentionally put back into circulation somehow is laughable, because if this was an intentional release, the Chinese would have to have known that this would kill huge numbers of people, and on top of that, it would be almost completely uncontrollable. But the possibility that it was an accidental release or due to negligence cannot be ruled out. And in fact, I think at this point we have to assume that that's exactly what's going on. Kyle Bass is the one that is tweeting this thing about this article. Just came up this morning. But do remember, folks, that this removal happened back in July of last year. So be careful with the Twitter sphere in that, you'll look at that headline and say, oh my God, this just happened. Well, no, this didn't just happen. This happened last year. But again, the allegation is that they sent material to Wuhan. And that facility happens to be the only level 4 virology facility in the Chinese nation. So this is starting to look more and more like an accidental release out of a biofacility. And if in fact that is the case, this is very, very bad. Folks, there's probably not a whole lot that you can do here. But one of the things that is very troubling is that we're now starting to see a few reports that a substantial number of the people who died in China died by direct hemorrhage out of their lungs. Okay, in other words, they're coughing up blood. That does not prove that this was not a secondary bacterial infection. That is the normal way that people die when they get killed by a flu bug, is that you end up with a secondary bacterial infection. It is in the lungs. It's pneumonia as a result, and the pneumonia is what kills you. This is why it's so dangerous in both elderly people who have or anyone who has a compromised immune system, and also the very young who have undeveloped immune systems. Incidentally, this is the best argument ever found for not sheltering your young children, your babies and infants and toddlers, and trying to oh my God, we have to make sure that they never get sick, and we can't let them outside, and they can't play in the dirt, and folks, you ought to take a look at some of the statistics. Okay, some of the most serious childhood diseases that kill on a very repeated basis. I'll just give you one example: leukemia. Leukemia is now believed to be actually a 2-phase disease. In other words, you have to be susceptible to it. You have to be genetically predisposed to possibly get it. But then on top of that, there is a triggering infection that has to take place that causes it, and it has to be of a kind and character that sets off that particular susceptibility. And as it turns out, being exceptionally clean when you're young and having a less developed immune system means that it is more likely that it will happen. And that, incidentally, is one of the reasons that in more affluent areas, leukemia is more prevalent. It is not that you happen to live near electrical lines, like so many people have tried to say. It is actually that your parents are doing counterproductive things by keeping you from getting every little bug when you're a kid. Isn't that a surprise, huh? So there was something to me running around out in the backyard, coming back inside the house covered in dirt and God knows what else when I was younger. Funny how that works. Funny how not doing that has a statistically significant impact in the wrong direction. Anyway, we still do not have facts when it comes to what's going on with this. And we're in trouble here. So this is something. This is definitely something to think about. And so we need to pay some attention to what's going on here. And again, folks, as I've said, if in fact this this really is what it is, there may not be any avoiding it at this point in time. I mean, self-quarantine for 30 days sounds like a good idea, but I'm not even sure that would be effective. What I would say to people if this really does get out of control and gets going. First off, if you're not consuming a decent amount of vitamin C, either from natural sources or from supplements, you probably want to start doing that and continue to do that on a regular basis through the rest of this until we know what's going on, simply because that does have some antiviral properties. Not large and but again, knocking down incipient infections down to something that are is manageable by your immune system is good. The second thing is that we really need to know whether or not some of these deaths are coming from cytokine or cytokine. Someday I'll actually look up the proper pronunciation of that. Activation within your system, because if that is what is happening here, and this is not a pneumonia-related thing, then we're in a lot of trouble, because those kinds of events are very difficult, if not impossible, to knock down. Pardon me, I'm drinking my coffee. In fact, about the only thing that you can do if you detect it quickly enough is try to suppress the immune response with a large corticosteroid dose and hope that you can stop it. The damage that occurs when those kinds of things happen, it happens so fast, though, that in many cases it ends up killing you because it does critical organ damage before anything can be done about it. So I would, we don't, folks, we don't know yet. I don't think it's time to ring the alarm bell at this point from a standpoint of, the United States. But the idea that this can be somehow contained into China or whatever have you is at this point laughable. And the people over there are clearly freaking out in that they are now locking down more and more cities. They are banning travel. And, most of this at this point is in mainland China. But for how long it stays there, well, since we have some cases here in the United States, look, if this really is a threat, a serious one, you're going to start to see counts in about another week. You're going to start to see counts in the United States, Australia, France, Japan, Malaysia, Taiwan. Other parts of the world are going to go ballistic. And if we see that kind of an exponential expansion, that's when you get worried. Right now, this is keep your nose down and watch it carefully. And incidentally, for those of you running around with your hair on fire thinking that it's a great idea to buy surgical masks that maybe were made in China, may I point out that you might actually be putting something on your nose that actually has the virus in it. That just sounds like an absolutely fantastic way to actually contract it. So maybe maybe some cheap N95s from Home Depot would be a better choice. Although God knows when they were made. But if you get probably made before this all started, so maybe a little bit safer. Anyway, the idea that you can somehow manage to avoid cross infection here is probably not going to be the case. Remember that for the most part, other than direct droplet transmission, in other words, somebody coughs or sneezes in front of you and blows particles on you, usually the way that this thing crosses people is that it gets on your hands, and then from your hands ends up in your nose, your mouth, or your eyes, and that's the vector that gets it into your body. It's difficult to prevent that. You can attempt to mitigate it by washing your hands frequently, and avoiding to the extent that you can touching those parts of your body. But this is not an easy thing to do because it's you say, well, I do that kind of thing. Okay, and then what happens with the food that you prepare or somebody else prepares if you eat out? Folks, if the transmissibility of this thing is very high, and so far it does not look like it is. It looks like it's about as transmissible as the common flu. This is not going to be a disaster. It will be bad, and it will be especially bad for people that have compromised health. What the nightmare scenario is that this thing reassorts itself in such a way that it has a transmissibility somewhere between mumps and measles. Those two, if it gets somewhere in that area, measles is kind of that's the nightmare scenario because measles is unbelievably transmissible. But mumps is kind of the lower end for the aw shit. Because even in that sort of a situation, even if the thing only has a 2 or 3% fatality rate, remember that what happens immediately in the United States and everywhere else is that there are no hospital beds. Across the entire United States, we have about 1 million hospital beds. There's 330 million Americans. So if any substantial percentage of people actually get sick and try to show up at the hospital, all you're going to do is give yourself a worse version of the bug. Like it or not, no matter what the situation is, in all probability, if this thing does get going here, your best alternative is going to be sit at home and try to tough it out. And I realize that is a horrible thing, especially if it's going sideways on you and it's getting really bad. But except in a absolute, right now sort of emergency where you are literally choking to death, I don't know that setting foot in a medical facility, which is going to be full of sick people with this thing, in that sort of situation is going to be a good idea. In fact, it is more, I don't know. If there's no beds, there's no beds. If there's no life support equipment available, there's not. Never mind that antibiotics do nothing for viral infections. So if this thing starts killing people by direct viral infection, we've got a nightmare on our hands. Anyway, that's what I got for today, folks. Don't know exactly where this is going yet, and I'm not ringing the alarm bell. I'm just saying that this is certainly the time to pay very close attention, and just remember that anything that comes out of the Chinese government is almost certainly a lie. That's what they do. We should lock the border down with them, and we should also kill this bullshit trade nonsense that we actually sat back on our hands after the Canadians caught these people stealing biomaterial and sending it to Wuhan. I mean, that's crazy. Okay, to transport that stuff with outside of legitimate channels is just flat out insane, and it points out exactly the sort of lack of care that goes on over in China all the time. For these people to have that kind of a facility in their country virtually guarantees this kind of accident. All right, so that may be what happened here. We don't know, but God help us all if that's in fact what we have fostered and allowed to take place. I'm your ticker guy. Have a good weekend.